The new boy sitting in the back row did not exist in any school registry or database. Sarah Jennings adjusted her tortoiseshell reading glasses, letting her gaze sweep over the AP history classroom with a practiced, calculated indifference. It was a rainy Tuesday morning in mid-November, the air inside the room thick with the smell of damp wool, cheap teenage body spray, and the low, persistent drone of the outdated heating vent above her desk. She was currently 20 minutes into a complex lecture on the proxy conflicts of the Cold War, a subject she found ironically fitting given the immediate situation unfolding before her eyes. Her official attendance roster, neatly printed and resting on her podium, clearly stated there were 22 students enrolled in this third-period class. She had silently counted the heads in the room 3 times since the starting bell rang. There were 23 bodies present. The anomaly sat in desk 4D. It was the furthest desk in the back left corner, a prime tactical position that offered a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the hallway windows, the main door, and the secondary emergency exit at the rear of the classroom. He looked to be about 17 years old, wearing a faded navy blue hoodie pulled low over his forehead, obscuring the upper half of his face in shadow. He wasn't looking at the interactive smartboard. He wasn't looking at his phone, hidden under a textbook, like half the other students. He was watching the door. His eyes, dark and hyper-alert, tracked the minute shifts in light and shadow as oblivious students passed by in the hallway outside. His posture was unnaturally rigid, his shoulders perfectly squared, his hands resting flat and still on the surface of the desk. He breathed in a slow, highly controlled rhythm. 4 seconds in, hold for 2, 4 seconds out. Tactical breathing. It was a technique designed to lower the heart rate in high-stress combat environments. Sarah's own pulse remained at a steady, icy 60 beats per minute. A decade of deep-cover federal investigations and high-stakes tactical operations in Eastern Europe had effectively trained the panic response entirely out of her nervous system, replacing it with a cold, methodical, analytical processor. She casually paused her lecture, stepping out from behind the wooden podium and walking slowly down the center aisle. Her sensible, rubber-soled loafers made absolutely no sound on the scuffed linoleum floor, a deeply ingrained habit she had never bothered to unlearn. She paused near his desk, leaning over slightly, tapping her index finger lightly on the edge of a closed textbook resting near his elbow. "I don't believe you checked in with me before the bell rang," Sarah said. Her voice was mild, perfectly projecting the warm, slightly exhausted persona of a tenured suburban high school teacher. "I'm Ms. Jennings. I don't recall seeing your name on my updated roster this morning. What's your name?" The boy shifted his gaze to her, moving his head fractions of an inch. Up close, his eyes were entirely dead, devoid of the usual teenage anxiety, boredom, or bravado. They were the eyes of a soldier scanning for threats. "Julian," he said softly. His voice barely carried over the sound of the rain hitting the windowpane. He offered no last name, no explanation, no apology. "Well, Julian, please make sure you pick up a syllabus from the front tray on your way out," she replied, offering a polite, practiced smile before deliberately turning her back on him. It was a calculated move to test his reaction. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't relax his posture. He merely resumed his silent overwatch of the classroom door. When the piercing shriek of the dismissal bell finally tore through the PA system, the room instantly erupted into the chaotic, noisy shuffle of heavy backpacks, scraping chairs, and overlapping conversations. Sarah stepped back to her desk to gather her lecture notes. It took her exactly 3 seconds to organize her folders. When she looked back up, desk 4D was completely empty. Julian hadn't just joined the flow of students leaving the room. He had vanished into the crowded hallway without leaving a single ripple in the crowd. It was a professional-grade evasion. Sarah immediately sat down at her computer terminal. She bypassed the standard teacher portal and brought up the district's central administration database. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing with a speed and precision that would have shocked her colleagues. She ran a comprehensive search for the name Julian across all 4 grade levels at Oak Creek High. 0 results found. Frowning, she widened the search parameters, checking recent district transfers, pending state enrollments, and even the heavily restricted disciplinary shadow files. Nothing. It was as if the boy had literally materialized out of thin air just to attend her class. Refusing to accept a dead end, she employed a localized backdoor bypass script she had quietly written and installed on her machine her first week on the job. She slipped past the school's rudimentary, outdated firewall to access the localized server security logs. She checked the digital swipe card access records for the front entrance from that morning. No unauthorized entries. She checked the biometric scanners for the cafeteria and the library. Completely empty. She closed the terminal, her mind racing through the tactical implications. She walked purposefully to the back of the empty classroom, standing over desk 4D. Julian had been sitting there for nearly 55 minutes. Sarah knelt down, retrieving a small penlight from her pocket. She inspected the surface of the desk. It was clean. Far too clean. There were no fresh pencil marks, no fingerprints, no smudges. She ran her fingers carefully under the molded plastic edge of the seat, feeling the hollow spaces. Her index finger brushed against something small, metallic, and cold, tucked deep into the joint of the metal frame. Using her fingernail, she carefully peeled away a small square of matte black gaffer tape. Attached to the tape was a micro-transmitter, no larger than a dime. It was a localized network ping device, military-grade, designed to passively intercept and clone encrypted Wi-Fi handshakes. A ghost student who understood tactical breathing, evaded surveillance, and left federal-level espionage hardware in a suburban high school. Sarah pocketed the small device, feeling the familiar, dormant instincts of her past life flaring violently back to life in her chest. The quiet, peaceful years of grading essays and chaperoning dances were officially over. The war had found her again. The faculty break room at Oak Creek High was an exercise in institutional depression, perpetually smelling of burnt coffee, ancient microwave popcorn, and lingering regret. Sarah stood quietly by the stainless steel sink, carefully rinsing out her ceramic mug, watching Counselor Mark Evans through her reflection in the dark windowpane. Evans was a bundle of frantic, nervous energy, a man who constantly chewed his cuticles and obsessively checked his smartwatch as if waiting for a bomb to detonate. He was currently aggressively stirring 3 packets of sugar into a foam cup of decaf, his hands trembling slightly. "Hey, Mark," Sarah said, keeping her tone light, breezy, and entirely conversational as she turned around, wiping her hands on a paper towel. "Quick question for you. Did we get a late transfer student this week? A kid named Julian? Dark hair, quiet, likes to sit in the back." Evans dropped his plastic stirrer. It clattered loudly against the linoleum floor, spraying brown droplets against the white cabinets. He scrambled to pick it up, his face flushing a deep, mottled red, sweat instantly beading on his receding hairline. "Julian? No. No, absolutely not, Sarah. Our enrollment has been strictly locked since October. You know the district policy regarding late transfers. It ruins our funding metrics." "I see. Must have been a kid from the neighboring district cutting class and wandering the halls then," she offered smoothly. Her eyes, however, were entirely focused on the rapid pulsing of Evans's carotid artery against his tight collar. He was terrified. His pupils were dilated, and his breathing had become shallow. It was the textbook physiological response of a man caught in a massive, dangerous lie. I'll keep an eye out. Maybe call security if I see him again. You do that, Evans stammered, frantically backing out of the break room, abandoning his coffee entirely. Don't engage if he comes back, okay? Just call Miller. Let security handle it. We don't want any liability issues. Sarah watched him flee down the hallway, her expression hardening. Evans was hiding something, and he lacked the psychological fortitude to do it well. She left the break room and headed straight for the school library. If Julian wasn't in the digital system, and the administration was actively covering for him, she needed to find the physical paper trail. Oak Creek High was built in the late 1960s, and beneath the shiny modern veneer of smartboards and tablets, the school's deep administration still relied heavily on paper records stored in the cavernous basement archives. She found Chloe sitting alone at a corner table, surrounded by towering, precarious stacks of advanced calculus and physics textbooks. Chloe was a junior, brilliant, intensely observant, and perpetually bored by the standard curriculum. She was also the only student in the entire school who had successfully figured out how to bypass the district's draconian content filters to access the deep web. "Chloe, I need a favor," Sarah whispered, pulling up a wooden chair and sitting down, keeping her voice low enough that the librarian couldn't hear. Chloe didn't look up from her complex equations, her pencil moving in rapid, jerky motions. "Depends on the favor, Ms. Jennings. If you want me to grade the freshman essays again, my hourly rate has gone up. Those kids cannot conjugate verbs. I need you to pull the manual access logs for the administration's secure file server. Specifically, the traffic coming from Counselor Evans's office over the last 48 hours. Chloe finally stopped writing, her dark, intelligent eyes locking onto Sarah's. The teenager's demeanor shifted from bored student to sharp analyst in a fraction of a second. Evans? His terminal is hardwired to the principal's private subnet. It's heavily monitored. If I ping it, I'll trip the internal alarms. Not if you route the query through the HVAC maintenance port in the ceiling above his office, Sarah instructed, sliding a small, handwritten slip of paper across the table. It contained a string of alphanumeric code. Use this IP address. It's an unpatched vulnerability in the thermostat software. It will give you a silent backdoor. Chloe looked at the paper, then back at her history teacher, her eyebrows raised in profound surprise. Where did you learn how to do this? I read a lot of history books, Sarah lied flawlessly. Can you do it? Give me 2 minutes, Chloe muttered, minimizing her homework and pulling up a dark, command line terminal window on her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Green text cascaded down the screen. Okay, I'm in the HVAC system. Pivoting to Evans's subnet, bypassing the local firewall. Got it. I'm looking at his recent file transfers. What did he send to the printer in the last hour? Sarah asked, leaning closer. Chloe frowned, highlighting a specific row of data. He didn't send anything to the printer. He sent a massive encrypted file to the industrial shredder in the basement. It's a digital burn protocol. He's destroying documents. Can you intercept the cache? I already did, Chloe smirked, tapping the enter key. An image loaded on the screen. It was a heavily redacted financial ledger, bearing the official seal of the Oak Creek School District. But attached to the top corner of the document was a high-resolution, digital photograph. It was Julian. Beneath his face was a forged birth certificate, a fake social security number, and a routing number for an offshore bank account located in the Cayman Islands. Sarah stared at the screen, her blood running cold. Evans wasn't just lying about a missing student. He was manufacturing fake identities using the school's infrastructure, turning invisible teenagers into lucrative, untraceable financial assets. And somebody was paying a massive amount of money to keep Julian hidden in plain sight. The security office at Oak Creek High was a cramped, windowless room located near the cafeteria loading dock, smelling intensely of stale donuts, ozone from the server racks, and cheap cologne. Sarah stood quietly outside the heavy metal door, listening. Inside, she could hear the muffled sounds of a sports talk radio show and the rhythmic clicking of a mouse. Guard Miller was on duty. Miller was a disgraced former police officer who had lost his badge under mysterious circumstances 5 years ago. Now, he wore a poorly fitted beige uniform, carried a heavy steel maglite like a weapon, and harbored a severe, unearned superiority complex. Sarah knocked twice, adopting an expression of mild, helpless frustration as she pushed the door open. Miller didn't bother to stand up. He leaned back in his squeaky leather chair, his boots resting on the desk next to a half-eaten powdered pastry. A bank of 12 surveillance monitors glowed brightly behind him, displaying various empty hallways and stairwells. "What can I do for you, Jennings?" Miller grunted, not bothering to mute the radio. "If it's about the kids vaping in the south bathrooms, I already know. I'll get to it when I get to it." "Actually, it's about my classroom," Sarah said, pointing vaguely down the hall. "The heavy blackout blinds on the east windows are jammed again. They're completely stuck halfway down, and the glare on the smartboard is making it impossible for the students to see the lecture notes. I tried pulling the cord, but I think the track is derailed. I really need a tall guy to reach up and force it back into place." Miller sighed heavily, the universal sound of a lazy man being asked to do the bare minimum of his job. He slowly swung his legs off the desk, his heavy utility belt jingling. "Maintenance is supposed to handle the blinds, Jennings. I'm security." I know," Sarah pleaded, looking sufficiently desperate. "But maintenance said they can't get to it until tomorrow, and I have 3 AP classes back to back. It'll take you 2 minutes, Miller. Please." Grumbling under his breath about teachers not knowing how to use basic equipment, Miller grabbed his radio and heavy flashlight. "Fine. 2 minutes. Don't touch anything in here while I'm gone. The equipment is sensitive." "I wouldn't dream of it," Sarah smiled warmly. The moment Miller's heavy footsteps faded down the corridor, Sarah's entire demeanor shifted. The helpless teacher vanished, replaced by a highly focused operative. She locked the heavy metal door from the inside and lunged toward the main terminal. She didn't have much time. Miller would realize the blinds were perfectly fine the moment he walked into her classroom. She had exactly 3 minutes to audit the entire security network. She pulled a specialized encrypted USB drive from her pocket, a remnant from her federal days, and jammed it into the master server tower. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, aggressively bypassing Miller's basic administrative passwords. She accessed the video archives from third period, specifically pulling up the feeds covering the East Wing hallway right after the bell rang. The monitors flickered, displaying the chaotic rush of students. Sarah enhanced the resolution, tracking the timestamp. She watched the classroom door. Students poured out, but Julian did not. She quickly switched to the camera located at the far end of the hall, near the emergency stairwell. Nothing. She checked the camera covering the lockers. Nothing. "You're a ghost," Sarah muttered, her eyes darting between the screens. She realized what he was doing. She pulled up the school's architectural blueprints on a secondary window, overlaying the camera angles. Julian wasn't invisible. He was utilizing the blind spots. Every camera has a panning radius and a hard limitation based on the angle of the lens. Julian had memorized the exact timing of the panning cameras and the physical dead zones in the hallways. He was moving exclusively in the digital shadows, stepping behind concrete pillars and open locker doors precisely when the camera swept past. She fast-forwarded the feeds, tracking his estimated trajectory based on the blind spots. The path led directly to the oldest part of the building, the condemned north wing stairwell. Sarah pulled up the camera feed for the north wing doors. The screen was pure static. The timestamp read, "No signal." Someone had physically severed the data cable to that specific camera. Suddenly, a heavy fist pounded violently against the locked metal door of the security office. "Jennings, open this door!" Miller roared from the hallway, rattling the doorknob aggressively. "The blinds in your room are perfectly fine. What are you doing in there?" Sarah didn't panic. She calmly initiated a rapid download sequence, copying the corrupted camera logs and the blind spot trajectory data onto her encrypted drive. The progress bar crawled agonizingly slow. 80%. 85%. "I'm opening the door with my master key, Jennings. Back away from the desk," Miller yelled, the sound of metal keys clinking against the lock. The download hit 100%. Sarah yanked the drive from the tower, cleared the access logs on the screen, and smoothly unlocked the door just as Miller shoved his way inside. "Sorry about that," Sarah gasped, holding her hand to her chest as if she had been startled. "The door just swung shut and locked on its own. I was trying to figure out how to open it." Miller glared at her, his face flushed with anger, his hand resting menacingly on his flashlight. He looked at the monitors, then back at her, his eyes narrowed in deep suspicion. "Stay out of my office, Jennings. Next time, I write you up." "Understood," Sarah nodded meekly, slipping past him into the hallway, the encrypted drive burning a hole in her pocket. She had her map. Tonight, she was going into the dark. The school was an entirely different beast after midnight. The familiar, chaotic energy of the day was replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the hum of the vending machines and the occasional settling groan of the building's ancient foundation. Sarah moved silently through the pitch-black corridors, dressed in dark, form-fitting tactical clothing, her hair pulled back tightly. She carried no flashlight, navigating solely by the ambient glow of the exit signs and her flawless memory of the floor plan. She bypassed the main hallways, sticking to the maintenance corridors to avoid Miller's nocturnal patrols. Following the trajectory she had mapped from the security feeds, she arrived at the heavy steel doors of the condemned north wing stairwell. A rusted chain and a heavy brass padlock secure the handles, accompanied by a faded sign warning of asbestos and structural instability. It was a brilliant deterrent for curious teenagers, but an insult to a trained professional. Sarah didn't bother picking the padlock. She knelt down, running her gloved fingers along the floor beneath the doorframe. The dust was disturbed, not by footprints, but by a smooth, sweeping motion. The door had been opened recently, and the chain was just a prop. She grabbed the heavy steel handle and pulled upward, applying pressure to the hinge rather than the lock. With a soft click, the magnetic seal holding the door in place disengaged. The padlock was a decoy. The Rayall lock was a high-end electromagnetic maglock wired directly into the wall. She slipped inside, letting the heavy door seal shut behind her. The air in the stairwell was freezing cold, completely devoid of the promised asbestos dust. Instead, it smelled faintly of ozone and expensive machine oil. She descended the concrete stairs, her soft-soled boots making zero noise. At the bottom, the stairs ended at a massive reinforced steel door that looked like it belonged on a bank vault, not a suburban high school boiler room. Next to the door was a sleek, black biometric fingerprint scanner. It was out of place, an absurd piece of high-tech security hidden in the rotting bowels of the school. Sarah pulled a small, specialized kit from her tactical vest. She lightly puffed a cloud of magnetic fingerprint powder over the glass surface of the scanner, using a soft camel hair brush to spread it evenly. The powder adhered to the residual oils left by the most recent user. A perfect, glowing green thumbprint materialized on the glass. She pulled out a small piece of lifting tape, carefully extracting the print, and transferred it to a digital scanner attached to her phone. She ran the print against the stolen administrative database she had compiled. The result took 3 seconds. It wasn't Counselor Evans. It wasn't Miller. The fingerprint belonged to Principal Arthur Vance. "You really shouldn't be down here, Ms. Jennings." The voice came from the shadows behind the industrial water heater, soft, flat, and entirely devoid of emotion. Sarah spun around, dropping instantly into a low, defensive crouch, her hand instinctively reaching for the tactical baton collapsed on her hip. Standing in the darkness, illuminated only by the faint red glow of the biometric scanner, was Julian. He wore the same dark hoodie, but his posture was different now. He wasn't a student hiding in a classroom. He was an operative standing his ground. "I could say the same to you, Julian," Sarah replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Or whatever your real name is. Does Principal Vance know you're stalking his private vault?" "Vance is a middleman. He's irrelevant," Julian said, taking a slow step forward. He kept his hands visible, a universal sign of non-aggression among professionals, but his muscles were coiled tight. "You found the ping device on my desk. You bypassed Miller. You lifted the print. You're very good. Too good for a history teacher. Who do you work for? NSA? Bureau? Or did a rival syndicate send you to burn the operation?" "I don't work for anyone anymore," Sarah stated, slowly standing up, keeping her hands near her sides. "I'm just a teacher who doesn't like it when her students are used as pawns in a money laundering scheme." Julian let out a dry, humorless scoff. "Money laundering? Is that what you think this is? You're playing checkers, Ms. Jennings. This is a targeted insertion program. Vance isn't stealing money. He's selling the architectural infrastructure of the school to people who build ghosts. If you open that door, you trigger a silent alarm that alerts a heavily armed retrieval team stationed 3 miles from here. They will kill you, they will kill Miller, and they will burn this school to the ground to protect the servers inside." "Then help me," Sarah challenged, staring the boy down. "You clearly want this operation dismantled, or you wouldn't have left the breadcrumbs for me to find. You want out." For a fraction of a second, the cold, dead mask slipped, and Sarah saw the terrified 17-year-old boy trapped beneath the conditioning. He looked at the heavy vault door, then back at her. "I can't," Julian whispered, stepping back into the shadows. "They have my sister. If I defect, she dies." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of heavy, panicked footsteps echoed from the top of the stairwell. Miller was doing his rounds. Julian gave Sarah one last warning look before violently launching himself upward, scrambling up the narrow gap between the concrete wall and the heavy iron pipes with terrifying speed, vanishing into the ventilation shaft just as the heavy steel doors at the top of the stairs burst open. The following morning, the oppressive tension within the school was palpable. Sarah sat at her desk, grading essays with mechanical precision, but her mind was replaying the encounter in the basement. Julian was a hostage, a weaponized teenager forced into compliance by a syndicate using the school as a staging ground for ghost operatives. And Principal Vance was the architect holding the keys. She needed to know exactly what was behind that vault door, but breaking the biometric lock would trigger the kill team Julian had warned her about. She needed a physical schematic to find a vulnerability. During her free period, Sarah bypassed the staff lounge and headed directly to the library archives. She found Chloe sitting in her usual spot, typing furiously on her laptop. "Chloe, I need you to do some physical digging today," Sarah said, dropping her voice to a whisper as she leaned over the table. "No computers. I need the original architectural blueprints for the North Wing. Specifically, the foundation revisions from 1986. Chloe raised an eyebrow. 1986? Ms. Jennings, those records aren't digitized. They're on microfiche in the back storage room. It's going to take hours to scroll through all that garbage.
I know.
But I need to know what was built underneath the boiler room before the district sealed it off.
Can you find it?
Chloe sighed, closing her laptop. Only because your class is the only one I'm not currently failing. Cover me if the librarian asks why I'm digging through the ancient history bins. 20 minutes later, they were huddled in the dusty, poorly lit back room of the library. The microfilm machine whirred loudly as Chloe rapidly scrolled through decades of mundane city council permits and electrical schematics.
Wait.
Stop, Sarah ordered, pointing at the glowing screen.
Go back 2 frames.
Chloe reversed the reel. The screen displayed a complex, highly detailed architectural diagram stamped with the seal of the Department of Defense. It wasn't a standard school basement.
What is that?
Chloe whispered, her eyes widening. That's not a boiler room. That looks like a bunker. It's a Cold War-era fallout shelter, Sarah muttered, tracing the lines on the screen. A lot of public schools built them in the late 60s and 80s with federal grants. But look at the modifications. Vance didn't just lock it, he retrofitted it. Look at the HVAC routing. He installed massive, industrial-grade cooling units. You don't need that much cooling for a storage space. You need it for a server farm, Chloe realized, looking at Sarah with a mixture of awe and fear. They're running a massive data center under the school. The heat signature would be insane. That's why the north wing is always so cold.
Exactly.
And if there's a server farm, there has to be a hardwired data trunk line connecting it to the outside world. I need to find where that cable breaches the foundation. Before Sarah could print the schematic, the heavy wooden door to the storage room violently swung open. Vice Principal Harrison stood in the doorway, his face twisted in a scowl. Harrison was a massive, intimidating man who acted as Vance's personal enforcer among the faculty.
What are you two doing in here?
Harrison demanded, his eyes darting to the glowing microfiche screen. He stepped into the room, his physical presence immediately suffocating the small space. This area is off-limits to students. Chloe is helping me with a research project for the AP History curriculum, Mr. Harrison, Sarah said smoothly, casually stepping between the vice principal and the student, shielding Chloe. We are studying the architectural impact of the Cold War on local municipal buildings. Harrison sneered, stepping closer, looming over Sarah. Principal Vance likes the curriculum to stay strictly within the approved textbook, Jennings. We don't need teachers encouraging students to go digging into the school's past. Turn off the machine and get back to class.
Both of you.
Of course, Sarah smiled politely, keeping her posture relaxed but firmly rooted. She reached out and casually popped the microfilm reel out of the machine, slipping it smoothly into her pocket in one fluid motion.
We were just finishing up anyway.
Harrison's eyes tracked the movement. He knew she had taken it, but he couldn't physically assault a teacher in the middle of the day. His jaw clenched in pure rage. You're playing a dangerous game, Jennings. People who ask too many questions at this school tend to find their contracts suddenly terminated.
I have tenure, Arthur, Sarah replied, her voice dropping a terrifying octave, shedding the polite teacher persona for a brief, chilling second.
The shift in her tone was so abrupt and menacing that Harrison physically took a step back.
I'm not going anywhere.
She grabbed Chloe's arm and escorted the terrified teenager out of the room. The target was firmly painted on Sarah's back now. Vance and Harrison knew she was closing in. She had the blueprints, she knew the location of the data trunk line, and she knew she had to strike the vault tonight, before they could purge the servers and relocate the ghost operatives. The storm hit just after midnight, unleashing a torrential downpour that battered the roof of Oak Creek High. The thunder provided the perfect acoustic cover for Sarah's infiltration. She bypassed the north wing entirely. Thanks to the 1986 blueprints, she knew the reinforced vault door was a fatal choke point. Instead, she navigated to the muddy, flooded exterior courtyard behind the cafeteria. Dressed in dark waterproof tactical gear, Sarah knelt in the freezing mud, using a heavy crowbar to pry open a rusted iron grate covering a massive, subterranean storm drain. This was the vulnerability. The industrial cooling units for Vance's server farm required massive amounts of water to vent the heat, routing the exhaust directly into the city's old drainage system. She slipped into the narrow, claustrophobic pipe, the freezing, foul-smelling water rushing around her ankles. She crawled in absolute darkness for nearly 50 yards, guided only by the deafening roar of the massive exhaust fans vibrating through the concrete. The pipe ended at a heavy steel mesh screen. Beyond it lay the bunker. Sarah pulled a compact thermal cutting torch from her rig. Igniting the blue flame, she meticulously melted through the heavy steel mesh, the rain masking the hiss of the torch. She kicked the weakened grate inward and hauled herself up into the fallout shelter. The scale of the operation was staggering. The bunker was massive, illuminated by the cold, sterile blue light of dozens of towering, state-of-the-art server racks. The noise of the cooling units was deafening. But it wasn't just servers. At the far end of the room was a staging area. Racks of tactical clothing, pelican cases filled with suppressed weaponry, and rows of pristine, blank passports from a dozen different countries. This wasn't just a data laundering hub, it was a fully operational forward operating base for a shadow syndicate. Sarah moved rapidly to the primary command terminal. She plugged in a heavy-duty, military-grade hard drive and initiated a root access override. The screen flooded with data. She wasn't just downloading financial records, she was downloading the complete operational matrix of the syndicate. Target lists, sleeper agent locations, and the true identities of hundreds of kidnapped teenagers like Julian, erased from society and weaponized. Suddenly, the heavy vault door on the far side of the room clanged loudly. The biometric lock cycled, turning from red to green. Sarah instantly killed the monitor screen but left the hard drive copying in the dark. She melted into the shadows behind the towering server racks, drawing a suppressed 9mm pistol she had retrieved from her personal cache. The heavy door swung open. Vice Principal Harrison stepped into the room, accompanied by 3 men wearing sleek, black tactical gear, carrying compact assault rifles. These weren't school security. These were professional syndicate fixers. Check the primary cooling line.
The pressure dropped, Harrison ordered, his voice echoing in the cavernous room.
Vance wants the servers prepped for immediate purge. The teacher knows too much. We're burning the site tonight. The 3 mercenaries fanned out, moving with lethal, disciplined precision, sweeping their rifles through the aisles. Sarah was trapped. The data transfer was only at 40%. She couldn't leave without the drive, and she couldn't engage 3 heavily armed professionals without triggering a bloodbath that would destroy the servers. She needed a distraction. She holstered her weapon and silently scaled the back of a server rack, pulling herself up into the heavy steel rafters above the lighting fixtures. She moved like a spider, positioning herself directly above Harrison. She reached into her vest and pulled out a small, spherical object, a commercial-grade flashbang she had modified to detonate on impact. She dropped it directly onto the concrete floor behind Harrison. The explosion was deafening, a blinding flash of white light accompanied by a concussive shockwave that shattered the overhead bulbs. The mercenaries screamed, dropping to their knees, blinded and disoriented. Sarah dropped from the rafters, landing silently behind the nearest mercenary. She didn't use lethal force, she used physics. She grabbed the barrel of his rifle, violently redirecting his blind, panicked fire into the ceiling, then drove her knee upward into his chest plate, instantly knocking the wind out of him. She swept his legs, sending him crashing to the floor, unconscious. Harrison, blinking wildly through the smoke, blindly drew a pistol and fired in her general direction. The bullets sparked wildly off the server racks. Sarah dove back into the shadows, checking the terminal. 95%. Come on. Sweep the room. Kill her. Harrison roared, terrified. The two remaining mercenaries recovered, clicking on tactical flashlights, the beams cutting through the smoke. They were closing in on the terminal. Sarah had seconds. The screen flashed green. Transfer complete. She snatched the hard drive, vaulting over the console just as a hail of bullets shredded the terminal monitor. She sprinted toward the exhaust pipe, diving headfirst into the rushing water just as the mercenaries rounded the corner, escaping into the subterranean darkness with the syndicate's entire playbook in her hand. Sarah emerged from the storm drain 2 blocks away from the school, completely soaked, covered in mud, and clutching the encrypted hard drive like a lifeline. She didn't go home. Her apartment would be compromised by now. Instead, she navigated through the torrential rain to an old abandoned strip mall on the edge of town, breaking into a dilapidated storefront she maintained as a secure secondary safehouse. She stripped off her wet tactical gear, bandaged a deep graze on her forearm where a ricochet had caught her, and booted up an air-gapped laptop on a makeshift plywood desk. She plugged in the hard drive. It was time to see exactly what Vance was building. As she decrypted the files, the sheer horror of the operation unfolded on the screen. The syndicate, referred to in the documents only as the Vanguard, was systematically infiltrating the American educational infrastructure. They weren't just kidnapping runaways. They were targeting high IQ orphans, manipulating foster care records, and erasing their existence. These children were then subjected to intense psychological conditioning and tactical training, hidden in plain sight as transfer students in suburban high schools. Julian was designated as Asset 04. His primary directive wasn't espionage, it was assassination. The ghost students were sleeper cells, positioned near major political and military hubs, waiting for a kill order. And Principal Vance was the regional handler. Suddenly, the motion sensor alarm Sarah had rigged to the storefront's back door blared a sharp, piercing electronic chirp. Someone had found her. Sarah instantly slammed the laptop shut, securing the drive in a waterproof pouch, and drew her weapon. She extinguished the single camping lantern, plunging the room into total darkness. She pressed her back against the peeling wallpaper near the doorway, controlling her breathing. The heavy metal back door creaked open slowly. A flashlight beam pierced the gloom, sweeping the empty room. "Jennings, I know you're in here," a gruff, trembling voice called out. It was security guard Miller. He stepped into the room, his gun drawn, but his hands were shaking violently. He looked terrified, completely out of his depth. Sarah didn't hesitate. She lunged from the shadows, grabbing his gun hand and twisting it violently upward. Miller yelped in pain as the weapon clattered to the floor. Sarah kicked the back of his knee, forcing him to the ground, and pressed the cold muzzle of her own pistol against the base of his skull. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't execute you right now, Miller," Sarah hissed, her voice radiating pure, lethal intent. Wait. I didn't come to kill you," Miller sobbed, pressing his face into the dirty floorboards. "Vance sent me to find you, but I'm trying to warn you. The school is compromised." Sarah kept her weapon steady. "Start talking. Fast." "Vance knows you breached the bunker," Miller babbled, tears streaming down his face. "He initiated Protocol Omega. He's not just purging the servers, he's purging the witnesses. He called in the local police, but the unit responding is corrupt. They're on the Vanguard's payroll. They're going to lock down the school tomorrow morning with the kids inside. They're going to frame you as an active shooter, kill you in the crossfire, and use the chaos to extract Julian and the servers without raising federal suspicion. Sarah's mind raced. A false flag active shooter lockdown. It was the perfect, monstrous cover. The police would cordon off the area, the media would swarm, and in the sheer panic, Vanguard fixers disguised as SWAT would execute her and extract their assets cleanly. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah demanded, pulling Miller up by his collar. "You work for Vance." "I took bribes to look the other way. I didn't know they were training kids to be assassins," Miller cried, his bravado entirely shattered. "I have a daughter, Jennings. I can't let them slaughter innocent kids just to cover their tracks. You have to stop them." Sarah lowered her weapon, staring at the broken man. The situation had just escalated from a stealth data heist to a full-scale hostage crisis. If she ran to the FBI now, the bureaucratic red tape would take hours to mobilize a response. By the time the feds arrived, Vance would have executed the plan, killed anyone who got in the way, and vanished into the wind.
"Miller," Sarah said, her voice terrifyingly calm as she holstered her weapon and grabbed her tactical vest.
"You're going to go back to Vance. You're going to tell him you couldn't find me. Are you crazy? He'll kill me. Not if you're useful. Keep him calm. Make him think he has the upper hand." Sarah loaded a fresh magazine into her pistol, racking the slide with a sharp, metallic clack. "Because tomorrow morning, I'm walking right into his trap. And I'm going to tear his entire operation to the ground." The piercing shriek of the lockdown alarm shattered the morning calm of Oak Creek High, plunging the entire building into a state of absolute, terrified chaos. Red strobe lights pulsed rhythmically in the hallways, casting violent, disjointed shadows against the lockers. The PA system crackled to life, Principal Vance's voice echoing with a manufactured, frantic urgency. "Attention all students and staff. This is a Code Red lockdown. I repeat, Code Red. An armed intruder has been spotted in the East Wing. The suspect is history teacher Sarah Jennings. Do not approach her. She is heavily armed and extremely dangerous. Police are on the scene. Lock your doors and stay hidden." Sarah was standing in the empty chemistry lab on the second floor when the announcement hit. She checked her watch. 8:15 a.m. Vance had moved faster than anticipated. He was accelerating the timeline. She peeked through the reinforced glass of the door. At the far end of the hallway, a team of 6 men in heavy SWAT gear breached the stairwell. But Sarah's trained eyes immediately caught the inconsistencies. Their tactical spacing was sloppy, their insignia lacked the standard municipal identifiers, and they carried suppressed, short-barreled rifles, weapons designed for quiet assassination, not public police action. They were Vanguard fixers disguised as law enforcement. She needed to get to the server room to trigger the dead man switch she had coded onto the hard drive, a localized worm that would automatically broadcast the syndicate's entire network to the NSA. But she couldn't leave the students unprotected. A quiet whimper drew her attention to the back of the lab. Huddled under a heavy oak science table was Chloe, clutching her laptop to her chest, her eyes wide with sheer terror. "Miss Jennings," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "They're saying you have a gun." "I do, Chloe. But I'm not here to hurt anyone," Sarah said gently, sliding across the floor to join the girl under the table. She looked the terrified teenager dead in the eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. Principal Vance is the bad guy. The men in the hallway are not real police. They are here to kill me and destroy evidence. I need you to be brave." Chloe swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "What do we do?" "We move," Sarah commanded. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and pulled the pin. She cracked the classroom door. Two of the fake SWAT officers were aggressively checking doors down the hall, moving toward them. Sarah hurled the extinguisher down the corridor. As it clattered against the linoleum, the fixers instantly turned, raising their rifles. Sarah fired a single, precise shot into the pressurized canister. The extinguisher exploded in a massive, blinding cloud of thick white chemical foam, completely obscuring the hallway and choking the fixers.
Run! Now!
Sarah yelled, grabbing Chloe's hand and dragging her out of the lab, sprinting in the opposite direction toward the old maintenance stairwell. They burst into the stairwell, but Sarah instantly slammed to a halt, throwing her arm out to stop Chloe. Standing on the landing below them, blocking their path to the basement, was Julian. He held a suppressed pistol aimed directly at Sarah's chest. His face was an emotionless mask, his tactical conditioning fully engaged. Asset 04, you have a clear shot. Terminate the target. Vance's voice crackled coldly over a secure earpiece tucked into Julian's ear. Sarah didn't raise her weapon. She stood between Julian and Chloe, offering herself as a human shield. "Julian," she said, her voice cutting through the blaring alarms. "Look at me. Look at the girl behind me. This isn't a training exercise. This is real life. If you pull that trigger, you cross a line you can never come back from. You become exactly the monster they built you to be." Julian's hand trembled. The pistol wavered. The programming was fighting the terrified boy beneath. "They have my sister," he choked out, his voice cracking. "If I don't kill you, she dies." "I have the master drive, Julian," Sarah countered fiercely. "I have the location of every Vanguard safe house in the country. Help me destroy the servers, help me get this girl to safety, and I swear to you on my life, I will bring the entire weight of the federal government down on their heads and pull your sister out. Choose." The heavy footsteps of the recovering fixers echoed from the hallway behind them. Time was up. Julian stared at Sarah, the internal war raging in his eyes. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the pistol. He reached up, ripped the earpiece from his ear, and crushed it under his boot. "The server room is fortified," Julian said, his voice dropping into a cold tactical register as he joined their side. "Vance is locked inside, initiating the purge. We have to breach it before he burns the data." Sarah smiled grimly, passing Chloe to Julian. "Get her to the roof access and lock the door. I'll handle Vance." The basement corridor leading to the fallout shelter was a war zone. The blaring lockdown alarms were muffled down here, replaced by the chaotic shouting of Vanguard fixers establishing a defensive perimeter. Sarah crouched behind a heavy concrete pillar, her breathing controlled, assessing the situation. Two heavily armored mercenaries guarded the vault door. They had deployed a portable barricade and were armed with military-grade automatic weapons. Frontal assault was suicide. She needed a tactical advantage. She looked up at the ceiling. The heavy, exposed pipes of the school's archaic heating and chemical disposal systems ran directly over the mercenaries' heads. She remembered the blueprints. The chemistry lab's emergency chemical shower drained directly into a holding tank located just above the vault. Sarah keyed the stolen radio she had taken from Miller. "Julian, are you and Chloe secure on the roof?" "Affirmative," Julian's voice crackled back. "We've barricaded the access hatch." "Good. Chloe, I need you to hack into the school's automated maintenance system. Override the safety valves for the chemistry lab's emergency drain and flush the primary cleaning solvent reservoir into the basement holding tank. Now." "On it," Chloe's voice came through, frantic typing echoing in the background. "Overriding valves. Flushing system. Ms. Jennings, that's highly corrosive industrial bleach. If it mixes with the ammonia in the janitorial lines, it's going to create a massive cloud of toxic chloramine gas." That's exactly what I'm counting on.
Do it.
Sarah pulled a small tactical respirator from her vest and strapped it over her mouth and nose. Above the mercenaries, a heavy, ominous groaning sound echoed from the pipes. The ancient PVC fittings, suddenly overwhelmed by the massive influx of pressurized, corrosive chemicals, began to buckle. With a violent, explosive crack, the main pipe directly above the barricade ruptured. Hundreds of gallons of toxic, noxious chemicals dumped directly onto the mercenaries. The two compounds mixed instantly upon hitting the concrete floor, violently reacting and rapidly filling the confined corridor with a thick, blinding, highly toxic cloud of yellow-green gas. The mercenaries dropped their weapons, screaming as the gas burned their eyes and throats, completely neutralizing their combat effectiveness in seconds. They stumbled blindly down the hall, desperately gasping for clean air, abandoning the vault door. Sarah moved through the toxic cloud with lethal efficiency, her respirator filtering the deadly gas. She reached the vault door. It was sealed shut from the inside. Vance was locked in. She pulled a block of military-grade C4 plastic explosive from her rig, a parting gift from her old life. She molded the putty directly onto the biometric locking mechanism, inserted a detonator, and stepped back around the concrete corner. She hit the trigger. The explosion shook the entire foundation of the school, a localized, shaped charge that blew the heavy steel locking mechanism completely out of its housing. The vault door groaned and swung inward. Sarah stormed into the server room, her weapon raised. Principal Vance was standing at the master console, bathed in the frantic red light of the purging servers. He was frantically typing, initiating the final deletion protocol. He spun around as Sarah entered, his face contorted in a mask of pure, desperate rage. He drew a small revolver from his jacket and fired wildly. The bullet grazed Sarah's shoulder, tearing through her jacket, but she didn't flinch. She closed the distance with terrifying speed. She didn't shoot him. She grabbed his gun hand, violently twisting his wrist until the bone audibly snapped. Vance screamed, dropping the revolver. Sarah drove the butt of her pistol brutally into his jaw, dropping him to his knees, utterly defeated. She shoved him aside and lunged for the terminal. The purge progress bar read 98%. Sarah slammed the encrypted hard drive into the master port and executed the dead man's switch. Her localized worm flooded the Vanguard's network, instantly arresting the purge and aggressively copying the syndicate's entire global architecture. The worm didn't just save the data, it weaponized it. It automatically broadcasted the unencrypted files, the sleeper agent locations, and the offshore bank accounts directly to the secure servers of the FBI, the NSA, and Interpol simultaneously. The screen flashed a brilliant, blinding green. Asterisk broadcast complete. Network compromised. Asterisk. The Vanguard was exposed. The ghost network was burning to the ground. Sarah looked down at Vance, who was clutching his shattered wrist, staring at the screen in absolute horror. "Class dismissed, Arthur," Sarah said coldly. Sirens wailed outside, but this time, they weren't Vanguard fixers. The massive data dump had triggered an immediate federal response. Real FBI tactical teams, helicopters, and heavily armored vehicles were swarming the school grounds. The siege was over. The aftermath was a scene of controlled, massive federal chaos. The rain had stopped, replaced by the flashing red and blue lights of dozens of police cruisers, ambulances, and unmarked black FBI SUVs swarming the Oak Creek High parking lot. Heavily armed federal agents were hauling the Vanguard fixers out in handcuffs, while paramedics tended to the shell-shocked students and staff. Sarah sat quietly on the bumper of an ambulance, a thick wool blanket draped over her shoulders, watching as Principal Vance and Counselor Evans were dragged into separate federal transport vehicles. Her arm was bandaged, her clothes were ruined, but her posture remained perfectly, rigidly straight. A man in a sharp, impeccably tailored dark suit bypassed the local police line and walked directly toward her. He was older, with silver hair and eyes that possessed the same cold, analytical calculation as Sarah's. It was Director Hayes, her former federal handler.
"You always did know how to make a spectacular mess, Sarah," Hayes said, his voice dry, though a hint of deep respect colored his tone.
He handed her a secure satellite phone. "The data you broadcasted was the Holy Grail. We're executing simultaneous raids on Vanguard safehouses across the globe. We have the CEO of the defense contractor in custody. The syndicate is dismantled." Sarah didn't take the phone. She looked out across the chaotic parking lot. Standing near a police barricade, speaking quietly with a federal agent, was Chloe. The girl was safe.
"And the boy?"
Sarah asked, her voice quiet. "Julian. Asset 04. Hayes sighed, a heavy, complicated sound. "That's the twist in the file, Sarah. We ran his genetics against the Vanguard database. Julian isn't just a kidnapped runaway. He is the biological son of the Vanguard's CEO. His father placed him into the meat grinder of the sleeper program to prove a psychotic point about loyalty and conditioning. The boy was supposed to be the heir to the entire syndicate, hidden in the system as the ultimate mole."
Sarah's eyes widened slightly, the magnitude of the revelation sinking in. The boy hadn't just defected from a gang. He had betrayed his own bloodline to stop a monster.
"We secured his sister from a black site in Virginia 20 minutes ago," Hayes continued, his voice softening slightly. "Julian gave us the access codes. He flipped. He's currently being entered into the highest tier of the Witness Protection Program. New name, new life, new country. He's a ghost, but this time, he's a good one. He wanted me to give you this." Hayes handed Sarah a small, folded piece of graph paper. Sarah opened it. It was written in the same sharp, precise block letters as the first note. Asterisk, the Cold War module was inaccurate. Thank you for the rewrite. J. Asterisk. Sarah smiled, a genuine, rare expression of warmth. She carefully folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. "You exposed a massive vulnerability in our domestic security, Sarah," Hayes said, his tone shifting back to strict business. "The Vanguard proved that high schools are the perfect blind spots for espionage. We need you back at the Bureau. We're spinning up a new counter-infiltration task force. I want you running it." Sarah looked up at the imposing brick facade of Oak Creek High. She watched the teachers consoling students, the sheer vulnerability of the institution laid bare. She thought about Chloe, and the hundreds of other brilliant, oblivious kids walking these halls every day. The government could arrest the CEOs and burn the servers, but the system was still fragile. It still needed someone standing in the dark, watching the doors. She stood up, pulling the blanket tightly around her shoulders, letting the cold wind hit her face.
"No," Sarah said, her voice resolute, echoing with the quiet, terrifying authority of a woman who had finally found her true purpose.
"I'm not coming back, Hayes. You handle the cartels and the defense contractors,
but leave the schools to me."
Hayes studied her face, realizing she was completely unmovable. He nodded slowly in respect. "What are you going to do, Sarah?" "I have tenure," Sarah replied smoothly, turning and walking back toward the school doors. "And I have a lot of essays to grade by Monday."